Test, test, test. Hello? Got it? Good.
Good morning. How's it going, brother?
Good, how are you?
You already got the mic guy? Andrew.
No, you're good. Good morning, everybody. Continuing on this morning here with our study of Job. Had a little break last week and getting back into it, picking up where we left off 2 weeks ago. And I do have quite a bit of material here. I want to try to cover as many chapters as we can, at least a couple of them, just try to keep on track and hopefully be able to finish the book by the time the class ends. 2 weeks ago, we read in chapters 12 and 13, and we actually read the full chapter, and I want to do the same with chapter 14 here, because we have Job's reply back to his friends. And as I said when we read the first two chapters, I really don't have a way to say anything better than the way Job said it himself. So I just want to begin the class here, just finishing up Job's words to his friends at 14, then we'll move on to how his friends feel about what he has to say. In chapter 14, it begins, mortals born of woman are few of days, full of trouble. They spring up like flowers and wither away, like fleeting shadows they do not endure. Do you fix your eye on them? Will you bring them before you for judgment? Who can bring what is pure from the impure? No one. A person's days are determined and have decreed the number of months and have set the limits he cannot exceed. So look away from him and let him alone till he has put in his labor like a hired laborer. In case you can't tell here, when I should have mentioned this before, he's continuing out his speech what he would be saying to God right now. And he's basically saying to God here, you've set the days of our lives. You said how long we're going to be here. Just why don't you leave us alone? Let us put in our labor and basically stop torturing me so bad is pretty much what he's saying. And he continues on, at least there is hope for a tree. If it is cut down, it will sprout again, and its new shoots will not fail. Its roots may grow old in the ground, and its stump die in the soil, yet at the scent of water it will bud and put forth shoots like a plant. But if a man dies and is laid low, he breathes his last and is no more. As the water of a lake dries up and a riverbed becomes parched and dry, so he lies down and does not rise till the heavens are no more. People will not awake or be roused from their sleep. If only you would hide me in the grave and your counsel and conceal me till your anger is past. If only you would set a time and then remember me. So think about it here, he's comparing again to nature. And he's saying, okay, a tree has a chance. If a tree dies, a tree can sprout again. But when a man dies, that's it. The man's not going to have life breathed into him. He's not going to have another chance. And as we've seen in the previous chapters, how he says he longs for death. Death would be his comfort. Death would be peace for him. What he asks here is he wants God to hide him in the grave and conceal him until his anger is past. He just wants God to just give him time, just let him die, let him lay. Whatever he did to make him angry, whatever he's over, whenever it's past, then come find him again. He says, if someone dies, will they live again? All the days of my heart service, I will wait for my renewal to come. You will call and I will answer you. You will long for the creature your hands have made. Surely then you will count my steps, but not keep track of my sin. My offenses will be sealed up in a bag. You will cover over my sin. But as the mountain erodes and crumbles and the rock is moved from its place, as the water wears away stones and torrents wash away the soil, so you destroy a person's hope. You overpower them once for all, and they are gone. You change their countenance and send them away. If their children are honored, they do not know it. If their offspring are brought low, they do not see it. They feel but the pain of their own bodies and mourn only for themselves. And it was a little break that we had between the beginning of what he says and the end of what he says, but you could still feel the power in Job's words here. And the one thing I always liked about this, he did start off talking to his friends. You'll notice a lot when Job talks. He talks a lot to his friends directly, but then he goes as if he's talking to God, and he's pleading his case to God and his friends at the same time. And chapter 13 and 14 here, 13 we read a couple weeks ago, you hear a lot of his plea to God, a lot of his begging of God. And it's a very moving section of Scripture. I don't know how I would have reacted if I would have sat there looking at a man in Job's condition and hearing these words come from his mouth. I would like to think that if I was one of his three friends sitting there with him, No matter how frustrated I was that he wasn't getting the point I was trying to put across to him. No matter how angry I was getting at some little jabs he would throw in there every now and then at his friends. I think this might have broken my heart. I think hearing these words and this plea might have made me start having a little more empathy and even sympathy for the man sitting there. I would like to think that's how his friends would have reacted. But sadly, they did not. This morning, I want to look at the first friend who speaks to him and then Job's reply back to him. And again, Eliphaz is the first one to reply. And Eliphaz was not moved by Job's words. He wasn't empathetic after hearing it. He didn't try to comfort Job. He didn't do what I would think a friend would do, would put a comforting arm around him and say, it's going to be okay. Instead, he finds a way, even with what Job said and the heartfelt plea he gave, to condemn him even more. Chapter 15, verse 1 starts, and Eliphaz the Temite replied, would a wise person answer with empty notions or fill their belly with a hot east wind? Would they argue with useless words, with speeches that have no value? But you even undermine, sorry, I can't even read that word I have there. Excuse me 1 second, I must type that wrong. But you even undermine piety and hinder devotion to God. Sorry about that. Your sin prompts your mouth, you adopt the tongue of the crafty. Your own mouth condemns you, not mine. Your own lips testify against you. Imagine for a moment you're Job. And you just I'll use chapters, these are 3 chapters here, just poured out your heart to your friends. All your emotion, your sorrow, everything you had built up, you just laid it all to bear. And this is the reply that your friend gives you. How would you feel at that moment? Sitting there. I don't know if I would have been angry, I think I might just give up and stop trying to convince him. I would be thinking right now, there's nothing I could say to make it even better. But he continues on and he asks him in the next series of verses a few questions. And I'm just going to paraphrase the questions here a little bit for time. But he asks him, do you not listen to God's counsel? Now that one I found interesting because is God sitting here counseling Job right now? Who's counseling him? His friends, people, men. They're counseling him with the knowledge they have and their understanding of what they know. But he says, do you not listen to God's counsel? In my mind, again, as we've seen so many times, that they seem to be taking on the place of thinking it's okay for them to speak for God. He asks him, do you have a monopoly on wisdom? If you remember when Job first started speaking to him in chapter 13, he was telling him, I know everything you know. I have wisdom just like you have wisdom. I know these things, but hear me. Yes, are you the only one who knows what's right? In no point did Job ever tell him, okay, you don't know anything. Listen to what I'm telling you, I know more than you. He's agreed, yes, I've heard all these things that you know. I've grown up and I've been taught all these things that you're saying to me right now. I know it. And he asks again, do you think you're more than us? What do you know that we don't? Well, if they would have listened for a few minutes, they might have heard what he knew a little bit and how he felt. Again, he speaks for God. Are God's consolations not enough for you? Words spoken gently to you. Now, that verse always made me laugh a little bit. Because when you hear the words his friends say to him, I don't see very much gentleness in those words. Maybe to his mind, they were being very nice and very kind and very comforting to him, but I don't see it. But again, he speaks in God's place, God's consolations for you. And the last one he answers is, why do you rage against God? Yes, Ron. Leonard. Ron. He's coming.
See, I want to go back to chapter 14, verse 14 for just a second. And it looks to me like Job is aware that there will be a resurrection. And he's telling God to go ahead and put me in the ground if you want to, but he'll look forward to that in so many words. I just wonder if that's not near the truth there.
I don't know. It doesn't really say. I mean, I think right now he's just hoping he could go hide somewhere where Black Bear's got to leave him alone for a little while. Oh, Leonard, can you come back up? He's got something else here.
In verse 14, chapter 14 says, if a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my hard service I will wait till my change comes. You shall call, and I will answer you. He's speaking to God in this chapter, is he not?
Yes, he is.
So I get the impression that he's aware that there will be an afterlife for him.
There's a few things in Job that makes me think. He does talk a lot about having an interceder in heaven. Someone pleading his case for him. Someone speaking to God for him already. There's a few things that Job does mention that at the time they didn't have that we have today that he mentions that are there. But what point in anything, I mean, Job is frustrated. I mean, he's voicing his opinion, but what point do you ever see that Job is raging against God? Where would they get the idea that he's raging against him? Yes, Leonard.
I would say, looking at his friends, a form of raging is at sometimes not being humble enough to admit you did something wrong, and that's why they're probably looking at it that way, because at no point, they keep telling me, you had to have done something. You had to have done something. You don't know much more than us, but we can see you're suffering from things that you possibly done, some sin in your life. But for you not to admit that you had that sin, that's considered raging in their offense. And I remember as a kid, as you get upset, I just would be quiet and be still. And my dad would say, why are you getting angry at me? Why are you basically pushing up against me? We know you're wrong. And that's what I think that context of what they're speaking about.
Okay. I kind of wondered too, I mean, because as they talk about their counsel they're giving and their comfort and their words, he's referring to here as God's counsel, God's counseling. I wonder if maybe in their mind they're thinking, okay, we're here, we're trying to impart God's wisdom to you and you're getting mad with us. Maybe that's where they could have thought the rage was coming from, because they truly thought that they were speaking for God. In verse 17 through 19, he falls back again on what they know. He says, listen to me and I will explain to you. Now, number one, I'm just going to say personally, if I'm ever angry at somebody and I'm having a disagreement with somebody, and in the middle they tell me, listen to me and let me explain it to you, it is not going to calm me down very much. It's going to get me a little more fired up here. It says, let me tell you what I have seen, what the wise have declared, hiding nothing received from their ancestors, to whom alone the land was given when no foreigners moved among them. Again, he's falling back to the wisdom of the ancient ones. He's falling back to the things that Job's already admitted. Yes, I know all these things. It's almost like his friends, the more he tries to explain, they're not hearing that part there, and they're just going right and only hearing what Job is trying to explain from his point of view and perspective. the rest of the chapter, he uses wisdom again, and I'm not going to read it for time's sake here because it's a very long chapter. He uses all this wisdom from the years and from the ancients and all these things that he's been taught, that he knows, again, to condemn Job. Chapter 16, Job replies back to him. And you could tell with Job's reply, Job is just getting frustrated. He's getting tired of the same argument. He picks up verse 1 and said that Job replied, I have heard many things like these. You are miserable comforters, all of you. Will your long-winded speeches never end? What ails you that you keep arguing? Yes, sir. Right back there, Leonard.
I just wanted to go back to the question about rage and the emotions that Job was feeling just for a second, and then put a pin in that. But it reminded me of Cain and Abel, mm-hmm. and the acceptance of Abel's offering and the disapproval for what Cain had brought forth. And the Bible reads there that, different translations may put this differently, though, that Cain in response became angry in his heart, and his countenance fell. And so I think there could be a connection between what Job's friends were witnessing in terms of how dejected or downcast Job had become, listening to the litigation or the accusation of his friends. Their interpretation on the surface may have been correct, but their understanding was not. But Job was probably downcast at that point. His countenance has fallen, having been subjected to the trials that he endured, and then the lack of comfort and understanding from his friends. I think it's not surprising to me that they might describe that as rage. He probably did look angry. And honestly, who wouldn't in those circumstances? So I just wanted to draw that parallel, because I do think you see those terms and that reference made to Cain, and it helps me understand how that might be associated here with Job.
I mean, I think Job would have to just be mentally exhausted by now. I mean, have you ever had just a really long, drawn-out argument with someone who just keeps going and going, and neither side will ever see the other side's points, and it just keeps arguing and arguing and arguing? It gets very tiring. Not only do you get physically tired of just dealing with the argument, but you get emotionally tired, because in your mind, you're trying to get your point across, and they're trying to get their point across, and it just keeps rolling over. I mean, there's been points where even I'm like Job, I'm like, will you just stop arguing with me already? There's no point in it. And I think not only does he have the anger, I think he's just getting fed up of it. He'd rather his friends just be quiet. I think by now he'd be happy his friend just got up and left. Just leave him alone. Let me sit here. I mean, I think as he's talking to God, saying, God, please hide me somewhere, he almost wants to be hidden from his friends at the same time, just for some peace. Right up here, Leonard.
So to me, with Job's friends, the devil attacked Job, right, with his family and his fortune, but he's also attacking Job through his friends. Mm-hmm. When you understand that this is just an attack from the devil using his friends to get him to come into agreement that Job did something wrong, this whole thing is just a wearing down through the friends with the devil using his friends, because they're not seeking God's counsel, and so they're trying to wear him down to bring him into agreement that he did something wrong. And that is the whole point of all these chapters, is to show that the devil will continue to wear you down as long as you entertain him.
Mm-hmm. You know, I like what you said there, and it's a very kind of a scary thought too at the same time. Because if you look at the arguments that they're given in Job, it's not things that are just made up. I mean, it's not flat out lies that they're feeding out to him. It's what they've been taught. The devil is using what they've been taught, what they believe, to attack him with. Yes, George.
Do you think his friends were sincere, and do you think his friends were really trying to help him?
In their own way, I do. I do, because it will get to a point in a minute. Job says he would have the same reaction. They may not be going about the right way, but they're going about the way they know, trying to help him get through what he is. Yes, sir.
The book of Job is, among other things, a study of human nature. And one of the aspects of that, as we're seeing in this section, is everybody thinks they've got the answer. They know what's right, and they have a disregard for other people's opinion. So I think that it is correct that they do have empathy for Job. They do feel sorry for him, but it's within the perspective of their viewpoint, not of the big picture of how God sees them.
And again, like we talked a couple weeks ago, it's easy for us to look down on Job's friends because we know more of the story than they know. We know why this is happening. They have no clue. Yes.
I think a lot of times in life today, what you see is when things happen to people, their first instinctual response is to try to find somebody to blame it on. And I think that's what these friends are trying to get Job to do. Blame this on somebody. Something has caused this, and if you can find somebody to blame it on, there'll be some type of relief associated with that. But I think that's where Job kind of gets the patience of Job. That's where he kind of gets that name, because he doesn't cave into that. He doesn't blame it on God. He doesn't blame it on anybody else.
And that's got to be hard for Job too, because like you said, we want to find someone who's at fault. For Job, he doesn't know. All he knows is his life was going good. He was living right. He was doing what he was supposed to do. Then the next thing you know, all this tragedy befalls him. So on top of everything else, he's probably trying to figure out in his mind, just like they, okay, why is this going on? Why am I going through this? And like I said before, Job kind of turns the table around on his friends, and he kind of admits he knows where they're coming from. In verse 4 and 5, he says, I can speak like you if you were in my place. I can make fine speeches against you and shake my head at you, but my mouth would encourage you, comfort from my lips bring you any relief. He's basically saying, okay, if one of you was sitting here right now in my place, and I was there, I could tell you the exact same things you're telling me. I could give you the same speeches. I could tell you the exact same things the ancient ones would say. I could tell you exactly what we've learned from the law. I could tell you you've had to done something wrong to be here. You need to repent. You need to confess, and it'll be better. But is it going to bring you any comfort? Is it going to make you feel any better if I sit here and shake my head at you? He speaks on a little bit. Did I miss a slider? I think I missed a slide. Sorry about that. He goes through the next few verses and he speaks of different ways that God has punished him. And it's really terrifying, some of the ways in his mind he sees that he's being targeted. He continues on right after he tells his friends how he could speak to them. And he says that he's been turned over to the ungodly. That they've thrown him to the clutches of the wicked. He's been shattered and seized by the neck and crushed. He's been made a target. God's archers have surrounded and attacked him. And he rushes him like a warrior. Think in your mind if you thought that was what was going on in your life. It'd be bad enough if he thought his friends were doing these things to him. If an enemy was doing these things to him, even a stranger. But he thinks this is God doing these things to him. Could you imagine the sheer, utter hopelessness that would put through your head, thinking that God has made you a target and he is throwing everything that he has at you? That would terrify me. But Job answers back, I have sewed sackcloth over my skin. I have buried my brow in dust. My face is red with weeping. Dark shadows ring my eyes. Yet my hands have been free of violence, and my prayer is pure. The chapter ends with a very powerful verse. It says, only a few years will pass before I take the path of no return. Even through it all, even feeling that he's being targeted by the Lord, he feels all this punishment is coming down on him. He's begging for peace. He's begging for mercy. He's begging just to be able to speak with God. His prayer is still pure. And when I read this last verse, I think about it. Can you imagine sitting there and, okay, well, in a few years, I'll pass on. He continues on in verse 17, and he says, my spirit is broken, my day is cut short, the grave awaits me. Surely mockers surround me, my eyes must dwell on their hostility. I love some of the little shots he gets in on his friends throughout the chapters here. They're sitting there, and can you imagine they're still trying, and they're listening to him, and they just listen to it again, and I'm not going to do any spoilers here, but they're not really moved by his speech here either, as you'll see as you go on through the book. First of them is, mockers surround me, and my eyes must dwell on their hostility. Some tough friends, isn't it? In verse 4 through 8, he talks a little bit about how he's viewed and acknowledged, that he is by God and he is in control. If you look at verses 3 and 4, I thought I had this on a slide, but I did not. I apologize for that. It says, give me, O God, the pledge of man. Who else will put up security for me? You have closed the mind's understanding, therefore you will not let them triumph. Through it all, he still knows God is in control. Yes, sir.
One thing that I get from this lesson of Job is that God had a plan past Job, and that the suffering of Job and him being righteous is a lesson to us. Mm-hmm. That God's plan was for this to be written and for it to be a lesson to us, that if you persevere and you're righteous, don't curse God. Mm-hmm. And don't curse another man. And Job was doing everything that was right, and his friends didn't understand. Mm-hmm. And that can happen to us sometime, and it doesn't mean that we could strike out. And Job said, I could do this or that, but he didn't. He still loved God, and that's why we have this book.
Very true. And yes.
And I'm sorry. Also, I think of the Price family that we know, or we don't know maybe, but Patty's friends that we pray for, and how often they've been in the hospital and back home and back. But the suffering of Job, what suffering we have in this life, who you may know that's suffered in this life, has suffered less than Job has in his life. So, just what Paul said, maybe God allowed that for us to be able to say, nobody ever suffered more than Job, and he stayed faithful to God, and the reward awaits for him. But he kept a good attitude, seemingly, unlike us at times, in our insignificant suffering. compared to Job.
Very true. Even in verse 9, it goes, nevertheless, the righteous will hold on to their ways, and those with clean hands will grow stronger. It amazes me still, and it really shouldn't, but it does, but how much faith and hope he still has. I mean, sitting there for I don't know how many days or hours or however this takes place and through his friends, but just constant arguing, constant misery. I mean, you got to realize, even though he's arguing with his friends here and he's still going through all that, he still has all the same physical pain and all the same physical wounds he's had. He's still dealing with the mourning, the loss of his children. He's still dealing with the loss of everything else. And it's almost like the bricks just keep piling on heavier and heavier, and yet he still has hope. He still has faith, and he still knows that this is okay because God is in charge of it. Whatever God wants to happen is going to happen. And I think Job realizes in his mind that, and he says, I'm just a man, I'm just flesh, I'm just blood. There's nothing he could do if he wanted to change what is going on right here. It's in God's hands. His friends keep giving him all these pearls and all these words of wisdom and all these cures, if you will. Well, Job, if you just do this, this, and this, everything's going to be fine. If you do this and this, everything's going to be good. But Job knows when God's ready for it to be good, if he's ready for it to be good, it will be. If he goes to his grave in this pain and misery, that's what it'll be. If God hides him away like he asked until his anger has passed over him, and then he calls him forward and everything's better, that's the way it's supposed to be. I think out of all the book of Job and how we talk about the patience of Job and the test of Job and the friends, I think, in my opinion, that's probably one of the most powerful lessons that hit home is it's going to be what God wants it to be. Yes, sir.
Yeah, going back to, in the beginning, it says, when the devil wanted to tempt him, and he says, look at your man, what does he say? Look at your man Job, let me tempt him, right? And he did that, and he says, I'll have him curse God. And so all this happens right there because of that conversation between the devil and God.
And even at the very beginning, it was still God's decision. Even the original conversations of the testing was in God's control. He let the devil have Job. And he set limitations to what the devil could do with Job on both times, and the devil lived by those limitations. Which I always thought is kind of ironic. You know, we think of the devil, we think he just can do whatever he wants while he's here. You know, he just do it anyway. But God told him, okay, you're not going to do this. He didn't do it. He couldn't. And I think in Job's mind, he knows that no matter how bad it is right now, it's only going to get as bad as God wants it to get. There's a passage in the New Testament, I draw the complete blank right now, I had it in my head, where it says, God will not tempt us more than what we are able to stand. With that, I feel bad for Job. Can you imagine knowing that a man could stand this much and still be faithful? How much does it take to shake our faith even just a little bit even today? Not much. I wonder if we all had to go through a trial even a quarter as hard as Job did, how many people would be in this building on a Sunday morning? Or exactly. They would just end it. I mean, how many people would be in, I don't care which religion it is or a building it is, how many people would you have there if these are the tests that you had to go through to please God? I think a lot of faith and hope would have been gone a whole lot sooner than this. We wouldn't be sitting here this deep in it thinking, you know what, it's okay. God's still in control. We have it. I like in verse 10, he offers his friends a challenge. And it's one of the things I love about Job. He's not worried about his friends. He just keeps going right back at them. He tells them, but come on, all of you, try again. I will not find a wise man among you. I love that verse. Can you imagine the look at his friends' faces when he said that to them? They're sitting there, and you can tell they're probably already getting frustrated, angry again. They're getting all wired up again because once again, Job's not taking their advice that's been given to them from God. He's not following what they're telling him to do. He's still arguing with them. He's still raging against God. He's still doing it his way, and he won't admit it. And he's like, okay, try again. What do you have? Because when you think about it, Job has answered every question they presented to him. Every accusation they made, he's answered. Everything they try to throw him, okay, well, you're cursing God, you're raging against God, but what does he do right after that? He talks about how he's praising God, how he's still putting his hope in God, his faith in God. And I don't mean to make it sound like they're trying to get him and catch him, but they have to be getting frustrated because even like George said, I know they're not doing it maliciously. They're trying to help. But can you imagine you're trying to help someone and they just seem like they don't want to take it? Yes, George.
I think a lesson for us here is it's okay to say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, when we're asked, we always give our opinion, at least I do. Right? And sometimes it's not true, it's not right. And we see at the end of the chapter that God thought they were wrong. So it's okay to say, I don't know, or let's look through this together or something. And oftentimes we're very quick to give our opinion, again, based on our situation, not the individual situation.
Very true. And again, sometimes when you answer, I don't know, people want to know, why don't you know? I've been asked that people ask me a question. I honestly don't know the answer to it. Even a scriptural question, well, what does this say? And I top of my head, I won't know. And I'll tell them, I don't know. Let me look at that and get back to you. And they almost get mad at you. Like, well, you go to church, you're a Christian, why don't you know? You teach classes, you preach sermons, why don't you know? Because we don't know everything. We like to think sometimes that we know everything, but we don't. And I think a little bit here you kind of have the back and forth where the friends think that they know all the answers, and Joe thinks he knows the answers. Their answers aren't matching up, and it just keeps boiling over and over. Yes, Leonard.
Well, James has it, where it talks about basically active listening. Basically, you want to listen and be slow to speak. And I think a lot of times, and even looking at Job's friends, they're not listening to hear Job. They're listening to respond to Job. They're not seeing him in the context of where he's at. And I remember when I was in service, and we would always, you'd be up, you're briefing generals, and you're talking to them, and they're asking you questions. The smart person will listen, formulate, and then answer. But you'll have, I don't know if we got any officers in here, but the young lieutenants and young guys, they always jump out there and answer. And you'd be sitting there, one of the older guys, you'd be like, okay, watch him get his head chopped off. And you'll see them, they go out there and answer something, and they'll say, I don't know, and that's not the right answer. I would be like, hey, let me take notes, sir. I'll get back to you. I'll take notes, ma'am. I'll get back to you. But I think we as Christians, we got to be the way James talks about. We got to listen. Agree with, I know some other brothers agree with me too. Listen, ask the question and listen again to make sure you're asking correctly. And where these guys wasn't doing that as a friend, not that there's a marital relationship going on there, they were just listening to answer, to get off my chest the knowledge that I have. I'm going to let them know I know something. When instead, they should be listening to see what Job is trying to explain to them and what God has put on his heart. Because Job didn't get where he got being just that guy. God has blessed him. And I think what we look at also, those friends, as we look in the Bible, when you're named in the Bible, you have some type of clout that's there for a specific reason. When you're unnamed, you're just a mentioned occurrence. So these guys had to have had some status within the community where Job was a part of. I think we had another question.
sorry, is not wildly popular. I personally don't think his friends had his best interest at heart. If they did, they would have been speaking life over Job, and just because you're a Christian doesn't mean your heart posture is correct. So you need to be careful. I think this story, more than anything, teaches us that not all your friends around you have your best interests, and if they're not in alignment with God, then they're not speaking life over you. They're not speaking life over Job at all. They're speaking death and condemnation, and that is of the devil. So again, this is an attack from the devil, but it shows us that we have to be mindful of who our friends are and who we keep near to us, because in a time of desperation that Job is under right now, they're speaking words of ill over him. And we know that the words that we speak, they have power, life, and death in the tongue, right? And so they're not speaking life over Job. They're speaking condemnation, and that is of the devil. So I personally, again, probably not wildly accepted, but I don't think they have their best interest. And that is true with a lot of people who, the ones closest to you, sometimes want to see you fall. They don't want to see you succeed. And it, to me, here is clear that his friends did not have his best interest, and that's just my personal opinion.
See, I agree in a way. Another way I question, because I think very beginning, starting out, they did. And they really think what they're doing is trying to help. And really, I think this is a lesson, and I love how you said that about the condemnation instead of love, is I think that's one thing, this is a lesson that we all need to take. I've seen so many times, and even people in the brotherhood are guilty of this, where you see somebody doing something wrong, we don't always tend to go to them in love. A lot of times, and I've seen it and I've heard it, you go to them, well, if you don't stop doing this, you're going to hell, you're not going to be saved. And sometimes we have a tendency to go at people just like Job's friends went at Job. So I think maybe the intentions, they thought their intentions were good, but they went about it the wrong way. Exactly. Yes, sir.
What was their source of knowledge and wisdom about God? Because I believe Job is like one of the oldest books of the actual Bible. So where were they getting their knowledge from God from? Was it just from word of mouth? Because when we look a lot of the Old Testament teachings, a lot of it was you reap what you sow, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, so on and so forth. So where were they learning about God? How would they study the ways of the Lord?
It was passed down, I believe, from the older generations, because they said a few times, look at what the older generation would tell you. So most of their knowledge, a lot of tradition and things that were passed down to them as well. Yes, sir.
You know, I don't think his friends understand what's going on here. If you look at chapter 18, Bildad's point is that wicked people are punished. That's true. Mm-hmm. If you look over a couple of chapters later, Zophar is going to talk about how there is joy in wickedness, but that's fleeting. Mm-hmm. That's true. So they're looking, I think, for earthly answers to an issue here that's between God and Satan and Job. They're observing something they don't understand.
Absolutely. You got one up here in front too, Leonard. I'm sorry, I thought somebody had their hand up there, sorry. All right, and the end of the chapter here, verse 11 through 16, he speaks once again about death. But only a few years will pass, and it's kind of a theme that you'll notice a lot from the previous chapters in here. He does it a lot, talking about his death and the release of death and the peace of death. Next week, we're going to pick up again because the second friend, which Sage just kind of alluded to here, Bildad, he gets his turn in talking to Job. Any other questions, comments, anything this morning before we dismiss? Yes, sir.
Just something quick. I agree with Ron. If you look here, there's a lot that talks about Job having an intercessor, somebody to speak to God on his behalf. Mm-hmm. Even then, there's always been someone speaking for man to God, you know, and it's a show. It's things coming, something that we enjoy today, but it was from the beginning that we had that privilege.
Mm-hmm. Very true. If nothing else, thank you all for your attention, and we will pick up next week.